A young boy fixes a broken bicycle for an old man, but just days later, he receives a shocking gift that changes everything. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The rain splattered against Jamal's hoodie, its relentless drumming matching the heaviness in his chest. 3 days until the anniversary of his father's death. 3 days until his mother would put on that brave smile that never quite reached her eyes. 3 days of pretending he was okay with being the man of the house at only 12 years old. He clutched his backpack tighter, quickening his pace through the downpour. The toolbox inside knocked against his math textbook with each step, a small kit his father had given him on his 10th birthday. "Every man needs his own tools, Jamal," he'd said. "These are just the beginning." Now those tools were among the only tangible connections he had left to his father. That, and the memory of large, calloused hands guiding his smaller ones, teaching him how to fix everything from toasters to bike chains. Through the curtain of rain, Jamal spotted a hunched figure ahead, an elderly man struggling to push what looked like a bicycle along the slippery sidewalk. The old man's clothes were soaked through, his white hair plastered to his forehead. With each labored step, the bike seemed to resist, its chain dragging uselessly against the wet pavement. Jamal slowed his pace, his mother's warnings echoing in his head. "Don't talk to strangers, especially when you're alone." But something about the old man's frustrated determination struck a chord within him. The man stopped, breathing heavily, his fingers trembling as he tried to adjust something on the bike's chain. When a car sped past, spraying dirty water over both man and machine, Jamal made his decision. "Excuse me, sir?" Jamal called out, keeping a safe distance. "Do you need some help with that?" The old man straightened as much as his bent back would allow, eyeing Jamal with suspicion. His face was weathered, deep lines carved around eyes that held a sharpness belying his frail appearance. "I'm fine," he said curtly, his voice surprisingly strong. "Just a minor setback." "I'm pretty good with bikes," Jamal persisted, stepping closer. "My dad taught me how to fix all kinds of things." The words slipped out before he could catch them, bringing with them the familiar ache. The old man's gaze softened slightly, traveling from Jamal's face to his soaked sneakers and back up again. Another gust of wind drove the rain harder, and the man winced. "It's just the chain," he finally conceded. "Came off and now it's stuck somehow." "I could take a look," Jamal offered. "I have some tools in my backpack." The old man hesitated, looking up at the darkening sky. After a moment, he nodded. "My house is just around the corner. You can look at it there where it's dry." He paused, then added gruffly, "Name's Wilson, Mr. Wilson." "I'm Jamal," he replied, falling into step beside the man. They walked in awkward silence, the only sounds being the rain, their footsteps, and the irregular scraping of the bike's chain. Jamal noticed Mr. Wilson stealing glances at him, as if reassessing his initial judgment. When they reached the small, well-kept house at the end of the block, Mr. Wilson fumbled with his keys before pushing the door open. "Come in, then," he said, "but leave your wet shoes at the door." Jamal stepped inside, immediately struck by the orderliness of the place. It wasn't fancy, but everything seemed to have its precise location. Framed photographs lined the walls, mostly in black and white. One caught Jamal's eye, a younger Mr. Wilson standing proudly next to what looked like a vintage car. "You can put the bike here." Mr. Wilson indicated a small mat near the entrance. "I'll get you something warm to drink. Can't have your mother blaming me if you catch cold." While Mr. Wilson disappeared into the kitchen, Jamal knelt beside the bicycle. It was an old model but well-maintained, or had been until recently. The chain had not only slipped off, but had somehow become tangled around the derailleur. No wonder the old man had been struggling. Jamal unzipped his backpack and took out his toolbox, feeling a small surge of pride as he arranged his tools beside him. This was something he knew how to do. This was something his father had taught him well. From the kitchen came the sounds of cupboards opening and closing, followed by the clinking of cups. "Hope you like hot chocolate," Mr. Wilson called out. "It's the only thing I know how to make that isn't coffee." "Hot chocolate's perfect." "Thank you," Jamal replied, his fingers already working deftly to free the chain. The familiar task was soothing, allowing his mind to focus on something other than the approaching anniversary. Mr. Wilson returned with 2 steaming mugs, setting one down near Jamal. "Careful, it's hot," he warned unnecessarily. He lowered himself into an armchair with a slight groan, watching Jamal work. "Where'd you learn to do that?" Mr. Wilson asked after a while. "My dad taught me," Jamal said, keeping his eyes on the task. He could fix anything. Said understanding how things work is the first step to making them better. "Smart man, your father," Mr. Wilson commented. His eyes drifted to one of the photographs on the wall, a woman with a gentle smile standing next to a much younger version of himself. "This bike was the last gift my Elaine gave me before she passed. Been riding it for 15 years now." Jamal nodded, not knowing quite what to say. "I'm sorry about your wife," he finally offered. "Long time ago now," Mr. Wilson replied, his voice softening. "Still miss her every day, though. Guess some things you never really get over. Just learn to live with." Jamal thought of his own father, of the crater his absence had left in their lives. "Yeah," he said quietly. "My dad died last year. Car accident." The ceramic mug slipped from Mr. Wilson's hands, clattering to the floor. Hot chocolate splashed across the hardwood, but the old man seemed frozen, staring at Jamal with an unreadable expression. "I'm so sorry," Jamal stammered, immediately abandoning the bike. "Let me help clean that up." Mr. Wilson blinked, as if coming back to himself. No, my fault entirely," he said, his voice strained. "Paper towels in the kitchen." When they had cleaned up the spill, an awkward silence descended. Mr. Wilson seemed distracted, his earlier openness replaced with something more guarded. Jamal returned to the bicycle, working more quickly now. 20 minutes later, he had the chain not only untangled but properly cleaned and oiled with supplies from Mr. Wilson's garage. When he demonstrated how smoothly the pedals now turned, he caught a flash of genuine admiration in the old man's eyes. "You've got a gift, son," Mr. Wilson said, "just like my—" He stopped abruptly, clearing his throat. "Just like a proper mechanic." "Thanks," Jamal said, warmth spreading through his chest at the praise. "My dad was a mechanic, actually. He always said I had the touch." Mr. Wilson nodded, his expression softening again. "Your father taught you well." As Jamal gathered his tools, his gaze was drawn to a photograph he hadn't noticed before. It showed Mr. Wilson standing next to a tall man in an elegant suit, both smiling broadly in front of a building with a distinctive logo. Parker Automotive. Jamal's heart skipped a beat. Parker Automotive was one of the biggest companies in the region. His father had always spoken of it with reverence, calling it the place where real innovation happens. "Is that Parker Automotive?" Jamal asked, pointing to the photo. "My dad always said he wished he could work there, said they made the best." The change in Mr. Wilson was immediate and jarring. His face hardened, and he stood up with surprising quickness. "It's getting late," he said, cutting Jamal off. "Your mother will be worried." "But," Jamal began, confused by the sudden shift. "Thank you for fixing the bicycle," Mr. Wilson said firmly, already moving toward the door. "It was kind of you." Jamal reluctantly packed his tools, bewildered by the abrupt end to what had felt like a budding connection. Had he said something wrong? The rain had eased to a drizzle as Mr. Wilson ushered him outside with uncomfortable haste. "Be safe going home now," the old man said, his voice gentler but still strained. "And thank you again." Before Jamal could respond, the door closed with a decisive click. Standing on the porch, Jamal pulled his hood back up, replaying the last few minutes in his mind. Whatever warmth had been building between them had vanished the moment he mentioned Parker Automotive. But why? As he started the walk home, the rain picking up again, Jamal couldn't shake the image of that photograph from his mind. The man in the elegant suit standing beside Mr. Wilson, the proud logo of Parker Automotive behind them, the same company his father had dreamed of working for, and where Jamal had privately sworn he would work someday too. 3 days had passed since Jamal's encounter with Mr. Wilson, yet the memory of that abrupt ending still puzzled him. The photograph with Parker Automotive's logo lingered in his mind like an unsolved equation. As he stepped through the front door after school, he called out to his mother. "Mom, I'm home." Diana's voice echoed from the kitchen. "How was school, honey? I made your favorite sandwich for a snack." Jamal dropped his backpack by the door and headed toward the kitchen, the scent of tuna and mayo guiding him. His mother stood at the counter, her nurse's scrubs exchanged for comfortable home clothes, her hair tied back in a loose ponytail. "School was fine. Mr. Harris liked my science project," Jamal said, sliding onto a stool at the counter. "I got an A." Diana's face lit up with pride. "That's wonderful. Your father would have been so—" The doorbell's chime interrupted her, its unexpected sound causing both of them to look toward the front door. "Are you expecting anyone?" Jamal asked, already halfway through his first bite of sandwich. Diana shook her head, wiping her hands on a dishcloth. "Maybe it's Mrs. Rodriguez returning my cake pan." Jamal watched as his mother walked to the door, straightening her shirt reflexively before opening it. On the doorstep stood a tall man in an impeccably tailored suit, his posture straight as a ruler. Even from the kitchen, Jamal could see the man's professionally styled hair and the gleam of an expensive watch at his wrist. "Good afternoon," the stranger said, his voice carrying a confident authority. "My name is Thomas Parker. I'm looking for a young man who helped my father with his bicycle a few days ago." Jamal nearly choked on his sandwich. "Parker? Like the automotive company?" Diana's body language shifted immediately, her shoulders tensing as she positioned herself more firmly in the doorway. "I'm not sure what you're talking about, Mr. Parker. There must be some mistake." Thomas Parker maintained his polite smile, though something in his eyes suggested he wasn't accustomed to being dismissed. "My father described a young boy, about 12, who helped him when his bicycle chain broke during the rainstorm on Tuesday. He said the boy mentioned his own father had been a mechanic." Jamal set his sandwich down and moved toward the door, curiosity overriding his mother's frequent warnings about strangers. As he appeared behind Diana, his eyes widened in recognition. It was the man from the photograph, older now, with threads of silver at his temples, but unmistakably the same person who had stood beside Mr. Wilson in that picture. "That's him," Thomas said, his smile widening. "Hello, young man. My father couldn't stop talking about how skillfully you fixed his bicycle." Diana turned to Jamal, her expression a mixture of surprise and disapproval. "Jamal? You helped someone with their bicycle?" Jamal nodded slowly. "It was raining really hard, Mom. There was this old man struggling with his bike, and I just helped him fix the chain. His name was Mr. Wilson." Thomas chuckled softly. "Wilson? Yes, that's what he goes by these days." He returned his attention to Diana. "Ma'am, I assure you my intentions are harmless. My father was quite impressed with your son's mechanical aptitude, and I wanted to thank him personally." Diana's protective stance didn't waver. "I appreciate that, Mr. Parker, but we're rather busy today." "Mom," Jamal interjected, unable to contain himself. "He's the man from the photograph in Mr. Wilson's house, the one with Parker Automotive." Thomas raised an eyebrow, seeming both surprised and pleased. "You noticed that, did you? You're observant as well as mechanically inclined." Diana sighed, recognizing the excitement in her son's eyes. After a moment's hesitation, she stepped aside. You can come in for a few minutes, Mr. Parker. Thank you, Thomas replied, stepping into their modest living room. Once they were seated, Thomas on the sofa, Diana and Jamal in adjacent armchairs, Thomas folded his hands in his lap. First, I should clarify something, he began. Wilson isn't actually my father's surname. It's Parker. Edward Parker. He started using his middle name as a surname after he retired. Jamal blinked in surprise. Edward Parker? Like of Parker Automotive? Thomas nodded. Co-founder and former CEO, yes. My father built that company from a single garage workshop to one of the region's largest automotive manufacturers. Diana glanced at Jamal, noting his widening eyes. I'm sorry, Mr. Parker, but why exactly are you here? When my father mentioned a young boy who helped him, I was intrigued. My father rarely accepts help from anyone these days. He's become reclusive. After my mother passed away 15 years ago, he changed. We had a significant disagreement about the direction of the company, and we haven't spoken much since. Jamal leaned forward. So you and your dad don't talk anymore? Because of the company? A shadow crossed Thomas's face. My father was resistant to expansion. He wanted to keep Parker Automotive small, focused on quality over quantity. I saw opportunities for growth that he refused to consider. And now? Diana asked, her tone guarded. Now I'm preparing to sell the company to foreign investors, Thomas admitted. The paperwork is nearly complete. My father always said I'd regret putting profit over craftsmanship, but the market has changed. Small automotive companies can't survive in today's economy. Jamal couldn't contain his enthusiasm. Parker Automotive is amazing. My dad always said they made the best engines in the state. He used to point out their cars on the road and tell me about all the special features. Thomas smiled, though his eyes remained sad. Your father had good taste. We've always prided ourselves on innovation and reliability. He paused, studying Jamal. Did you enjoy helping my father with his bicycle? Yeah, it was easy. The chain was just tangled around the derailleur. Mr. Parker seemed really nice. Kind of lonely, though. Diana shot her son a warning look, but Thomas nodded thoughtfully. Lonely. Yes, I suppose he would be. He lives alone in that house where he and my mother spent 40 years together. Thomas cleared his throat. Did he talk much? Jamal shrugged. A little. He told me the bike was a gift from his wife. He seemed interested when I mentioned my dad teaching me about tools, but then... Then what? Thomas prompted when Jamal hesitated. Then I saw the photo of Parker Automotive and mentioned it, and he got weird. Like, suddenly he wanted me to leave. Thomas's expression darkened. That sounds like my father. The company has become a sore subject. He turned to Diana. Mrs. Silva, Diana Silva. Mrs. Silva, your son has a remarkable talent. My father said he handled those tools like someone twice his age. If he has any interest in mechanics or engineering, I'd be happy to arrange a tour of Parker Automotive for him. Jamal's face lit up. Really? That would be... No, thank you, Diana interrupted firmly. Jamal is focused on his schoolwork right now. Thomas reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a business card. Perhaps another time then, if you change your mind. As he extended the card toward Jamal, Diana's hand shot out, striking Thomas's wrist. The card fluttered to the carpet. Mr. Parker, Diana said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. I appreciate your visit, but I'm not interested in having my son involved with your family or your company. I don't know what you really want, but Jamal is not some project for you to take on to ease whatever guilt you feel about your relationship with your father. Thomas stared at her, genuine shock registering on his face. After a moment, he bent down and retrieved his card, placing it on the coffee table instead. I understand your protectiveness, Mrs. Silva. I meant no offense. To Jamal's surprise, Thomas's eyes had filled with tears. He blinked them back quickly, but not before both Jamal and Diana noticed. The truth is, seeing my father's reaction to your son stirred something in me. My own son, Ryan, would have been about Jamal's age now. The silence that followed was deafening. Diana's expression softened slightly. Would have been? Thomas nodded, looking down at his hands. He died in a car accident 5 years ago. He was only 7. His voice cracked on the last word. Jamal felt as if all the air had been sucked from the room. Diana's hand went involuntarily to her heart. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. "My father blames himself," Thomas continued, seeming unable to stop now that he had started. "He taught Ryan to drive when he was too young, just sitting on his lap in an empty parking lot. It was a family tradition of sorts. My grandfather taught my father taught me, and..." He drew a deep breath. "The accident had nothing to do with that, of course. It was a drunk driver who hit my wife's car. Ryan was in the back seat. My wife survived with injuries." Diana reached for a tissue from the box on the side table and handed it to Thomas, who accepted it with a nod of thanks. "My father became convinced that his reckless teaching had somehow contributed to the tragedy, that if he hadn't instilled such a love for cars in all of us, perhaps Ryan wouldn't have been so eager to lean forward between the seats that day, distracting my wife at precisely the wrong moment." Thomas dabbed at his eyes. "It's nonsense, of course, but grief isn't rational. When I wouldn't let him blame himself, he found ways to blame me instead. For working too much. For buying the sports car my wife was driving. For putting expansion over family." Jamal sat still, trying to process this sudden revelation. The elegant businessman who had appeared at their door now seemed fragile, human. "My father blames himself for the accident," said Thomas, his voice breaking, "because he taught Ryan to drive when he was very young, the same way he taught me and the same way his father taught him. 3 generations of Parkers passionate about cars, now reduced to 2 who can hardly look each other in the eye." The living room fell into a heavy silence after Thomas's revelation. The only sound was the ticking of the old clock on the wall, marking seconds that seemed to stretch far longer than they should. Diana's face had softened, the protective anger replaced by the compassion that made her such an exceptional nurse. She leaned forward and offered Thomas a glass of water from the coffee table. "Thank you," he said quietly, taking a small sip. His composure was returning, though his hands still trembled slightly. He set the glass down carefully and pulled out a worn photograph from his wallet. "This is Ryan," Thomas said, extending the photo toward Jamal. Jamal accepted it gently, studying the image of a smiling boy with his father's eyes and a gap-toothed grin, proudly holding what looked like a small trophy. "Science fair," Thomas explained with a sad smile. "He built a solar-powered toy car. Engineering was in his blood, just like it seems to be in yours." Diana moved closer to Jamal, looking over his shoulder at the photograph. Her arm wrapped protectively around her son, but her expression had changed. This wasn't the calculating businessman she'd imagined Thomas to be. This was a father who had suffered an unimaginable loss. "He looks like a happy kid," Jamal said, handing the photo back. Thomas nodded, carefully returning the photograph to his wallet. He was, full of energy and curiosity, always asking how things worked. His eyes met Jamal's. My father was the one who nurtured that in him, just as he did with me. "What was your father like before?" Jamal asked hesitantly. Thomas leaned back, his gaze drifting to the window. "Edward Parker was the most patient teacher you could imagine, but also the strictest. He could spend hours showing you how to properly adjust a carburetor, but heaven help you if you left tools lying around or didn't clean up your workspace." A genuine smile crossed his face. "He believed that understanding how something works gives you respect for it. Cars weren't just machines to him. They were puzzles, challenges, sometimes even art. Jamal nodded eagerly. My dad used to say something like that too. He said cars have personalities. Exactly, Thomas said, his enthusiasm momentarily overcoming his grief. That's exactly what my father would say. This engine is temperamental, or this transmission is honest, as if they were living things. Diana's posture had relaxed slightly, though she remained beside Jamal. How did Parker Automotive begin? Was it always such a large company? Thomas shook his head. Far from it. My father and his brother started in a garage barely bigger than this living room. They specialized in restoring classic cars at first, building a reputation for meticulous work. When my uncle died young, heart attack, Dad channeled his grief into expanding the business. By the time I joined after college, we had 30 employees and our own small factory. And that's when things started to change? Diana asked, perceptively. Yes, Thomas admitted. I had an MBA and big ideas. Dad wanted to keep the company focused on craftsmanship, limited production runs, specialty vehicles. I saw potential for growth, for competing with larger manufacturers. We argued constantly. Is that why you're selling the company now? Jamal asked. Because it got too big? Thomas's expression darkened. After Ryan died, I threw myself into work. Expansion became an obsession. Perhaps I thought if I could just make the company successful enough, it would justify... He trailed off. But now I'm not so sure anymore. What do you mean? Diana asked. Seeing my father's reaction to Jamal, how he opened up, however briefly, made me question whether I'm making the right decision. Parker Automotive has been my father's life's work. Selling it to investors who will likely dismantle it for parts and patents feels like a final betrayal. Diana studied Thomas carefully, suspicion returning to her eyes. Mr. Parker, why are you really here? What do you want from my son? Thomas met her gaze directly. Honestly, Mrs. Silva, I'm not entirely sure. When my father described this young man, who fixed his bicycle and showed such interest in mechanics, something resonated. Perhaps I saw a glimpse of the relationship my father and I once had, or what Ryan might have become. He paused. Or perhaps I'm simply trying to make amends before it's too late. Jamal looked between his mother and Thomas, feeling the weight of adult complexities he didn't fully understand. But he recognized pain when he saw it. He'd become an expert in that since his father died. I could talk to your dad again, Jamal offered suddenly. Maybe help him fix something else. Jamal, Diana warned, but her tone lacked its earlier edge. Thomas shook his head gently. That's very kind, but my father is a proud man. He'd see through any manufactured reason to visit. He reached for his business card on the table. But if you ever want that tour of Parker Automotive, the offer stands. We still have some of the best engineers in the state, despite my father's concerns about our direction. Diana didn't reach to intercept the card this time, though her lips pressed into a thin line as Jamal accepted it. Thank you, Mr. Parker, Jamal said, studying the embossed logo. My dad would have loved to see inside Parker Automotive. He always said they were the gold standard for innovation. Thomas stood, straightening his suit jacket. Your father sounds like a man of discernment. I would have been proud to have him on our team. He extended his hand first to Diana, who after a moment's hesitation shook it briefly, then to Jamal, who grasped it firmly as his father had taught him. I should be going. Thank you for your time and understanding, Thomas said, moving toward the door. He paused with his hand on the doorknob. Mrs. Silva, you've raised a remarkable young man. His kindness toward my father means more than you might realize. After Thomas left, Diana closed the door and leaned against it, her eyes closed. Jamal, what were you thinking? Going to a stranger's house? Do you have any idea how dangerous that could have been? But Mom, Mr. Parker, He needed help. Dad would have stopped to help him too. Diana's expression softened. Yes, he would have. She pushed away from the door and joined Jamal on the sofa. I just worry about you, honey. You're all I have left. Jamal nodded, fingering the business card Thomas had given him. Do you think Mr. Parker was telling the truth? About his son and everything? I believe he was, Diana said after a moment. Grief has a certain authenticity to it. You can't fake that kind of pain. She gently took the card from Jamal's hands. But that doesn't mean I want you getting involved with the Parkers and their family drama. Why not? Jamal asked. Maybe I could help them. Mr. Wilson seemed really sad and lonely, and now I know why. Wouldn't it be good if they could be friends again? Diana tucked the card into her pocket. It's not your responsibility to fix their relationship, Jamal. These are grown men who've made their choices. But Dad always said we should help people when we can. He stopped to help that lady change her tire in the rain, remember? Even though we were late for my basketball game. A small smile touched Diana's lips. I remember. Your father had a heart bigger than his common sense sometimes. Her expression grew serious again. But this is different. The Parkers are wealthy, powerful people with complicated lives. I don't want you getting hurt. How would I get hurt? I just fixed a bike. Diana sighed, brushing a hand over Jamal's short curls. Sometimes people use others to get what they want. Thomas Parker might see you as a way to reconnect with his father without having to admit he was wrong about whatever they argued over. Jamal considered this. Or maybe he just wants his dad to be happy again. Like how you want me to be happy even when I know you're sad about Dad. Diana pulled Jamal into a tight hug, her voice muffled against his head. When did you get so wise, Later that evening, as Jamal worked on his homework at the kitchen table, he couldn't stop thinking about the Parkers. The image of Mr. Wilson alone in that neat, quiet house haunted him. And Thomas, carrying around a worn photograph of his son, it reminded Jamal too much of how his mother sometimes took out the family album late at night when she thought he was asleep. He glanced at his mother, who was reviewing patient charts at the other end of the table. Mom? She responded, not looking up from her work. What if there's a way I could help the Parkers without getting involved in their problems? Just, I don't know, being nice to Mr. Wilson sometimes? Diana set down her pen and looked at her son. Jamal, I understand you want to help. It's one of the things I love most about you. But I'm worried about you getting attached to these people who might disappear from your life as quickly as they entered it. Like Dad disappeared, Jamal said quietly. Diana's face softened with pain. That was different. Your father would never have chosen to leave us. I know, Jamal said. But maybe that's why we should help people while they're still here. Dad would want that. Diana studied her son for a long moment, conflict evident in her eyes. Finally, she reached into her pocket and placed Thomas's business card on the table between them. We'll think about it, she said. But no promises and no visiting Mr. Wilson without telling me first. Understood? Jamal nodded eagerly, already imagining how he might help bring father and son back together. His dad had always been a fixer, not just of machines, but of problems too. Perhaps this was Jamal's chance to honor that legacy. As he put the card carefully in his desk drawer that night, a plan was already forming in his mind. While he tucked Thomas's card away, Jamal's eyes fell on his father's old toolbox in the corner of his room. Something clicked into place, a solution as elegant as any mechanical repair. While he guarded the card like a treasure Thomas had unknowingly given him, Jamal made a decision. Tomorrow, after school, he would visit Mr. Wilson again, not just to fix a bicycle, but to try to repair an entire family. The next day after school, Jamal stood hesitantly at the corner of Mr. Wilson's street, his father's old toolbox clutched tightly in his hand. His mother's warnings echoed in his mind, but the image of the lonely old man pushed him forward. He'd left a note for his mom saying he was going to a friend's house to study. Not exactly a lie, he reasoned, since he hoped Mr. Wilson might become a friend eventually. The weather had cleared since their first meeting, and sunshine warmed the quiet neighborhood. As he approached the modest house, Jamal noticed the blue bicycle propped against the porch railing, its chain now functioning perfectly. The sight gave him a small surge of confidence. At least he had that connection to build upon. He took a deep breath and knocked on the door, more firmly than he felt. No answer came. He knocked again, louder this time, and pressed his ear to the door. Was that a sound inside? Something like a groan. "Mr. Wilson?" he called out. "It's Jamal, the kid who fixed your bike." Still no response, but now he was certain he heard something, a faint call that sounded distressed. Concern overrode hesitation, and Jamal tried the doorknob. To his surprise, it turned easily in his hand. "Mr. Wilson?" he called again as he cautiously pushed the door open. "I'm coming in, okay? Just to make sure you're all right." The front room was exactly as he remembered it, neat and organized, with the framed photograph still proudly displayed. But a sound from the kitchen drew his attention, and what he saw there made his heart stop. Mr. Wilson lay crumpled on the floor, one arm outstretched toward the counter, where a cordless phone sat just beyond his reach. His eyes were open but unfocused, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "Mr. Wilson!" Jamal dropped his toolbox and rushed to the old man's side. "What happened? Are you hurt?" The elderly man's eyes focused briefly on Jamal's face. "Dizzy," he managed to say. "Can't get up." Jamal's hands trembled as he reached for the phone. His mother had drilled emergency procedures into him repeatedly, and now he was grateful for her foresight. "I'm calling an ambulance," he told Mr. Wilson, punching 911 with shaking fingers. As he waited for the operator to answer, he gently took the old man's hand. "It's going to be okay. Just stay still." After giving the operator the address and a brief description of the situation, Jamal remembered Thomas's business card tucked in his pocket. "I'm going to call your son, too," he told Mr. Wilson, whose eyes widened slightly at the mention. "No," Mr. Wilson whispered, but his protest lacked conviction. "He needs to know," Jamal insisted, already dialing the number. When Thomas answered, Jamal's words tumbled out in a rush. "Mr. Parker, it's Jamal, the kid who fixed your dad's bike. I'm at his house and he's fallen or something. The ambulance is coming, but I thought you should know." "I'll be right there," Thomas replied, his voice tight with concern. "Which hospital will they take him to?" "I don't know yet," Jamal admitted. "I'll call you when I find out." "No, I'm coming to the house now. Stay with him, please." The next half hour passed in a blur. The paramedics arrived, checked Mr. Wilson's vital signs, and determined he needed to go to the hospital for evaluation. As they were loading him onto a stretcher, Thomas's sleek car screeched to a halt outside. "Dad!" Thomas called out, rushing through the open door. The panic in his voice was unmistakable. "Sir, are you family?" one of the paramedics asked. "I'm his son," Thomas confirmed, his usual polished demeanor cracked with worry. His eyes met Jamal's briefly. "Thank you," he mouthed silently. "We're taking him to Mercy General," the paramedic explained. "His vitals are stable, but we want to run some tests. Are you riding with us or following in your car?" Thomas hesitated, glancing around the house. "I'll follow. I need to lock up here first." As the ambulance departed, Thomas turned to Jamal. "How did you find him? What were you doing here?" Jamal shifted uncomfortably. "I wanted to check on him, see if his bike was still working okay. When I knocked, he didn't answer, but the door was unlocked and I heard him calling for help." Thomas ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, disheveling it. "If you hadn't come by—" He didn't finish the thought. "I need to get to the hospital. Do you need a ride home?" "Actually," Jamal said, gathering his courage, "I'd like to come to the hospital too, if that's okay. My mom's a nurse, but not at Mercy. She works at County." Thomas seemed to consider this for a moment, then nodded. All right, but you should call your mother. Let her know where you'll be. Jamal swallowed hard. He hadn't anticipated this complication. She's working a double shift today, he lied, hating himself for it but seeing no alternative. I'll leave her a note at home. If Thomas suspected the untruth, he didn't show it. He simply nodded and led the way to his car, a luxury sedan with leather seats that made Jamal feel suddenly aware of his worn sneakers and secondhand jeans. The drive to the hospital was mostly silent, with Thomas occasionally murmuring to himself about should have checked on him more often and too stubborn for his own good. Jamal stared out the window, wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake by getting involved. At Mercy General, they were directed to a waiting area while doctors examined Mr. Wilson. Thomas paced restlessly, checking his watch every few minutes. Jamal sat quietly, observing the man's anxiety with a strange sense of familiarity. He'd seen his mother exhibit the same barely contained worry during his father's final days. He'll be okay, Jamal offered, not knowing if it was true but feeling compelled to say something. He seemed alert, just couldn't get up. Thomas paused his pacing and looked at Jamal as if suddenly remembering he was there. Yes, I'm sure you're right. He sat down heavily in the chair beside Jamal. Thank you for finding him, for calling me. I thought you should know, Jamal said simply. You're his son. Thomas's expression darkened slightly. A son who hasn't properly spoken to his father in years. But you came right away, Jamal pointed out. That counts for something. Before Thomas could respond, a doctor in a white coat approached them. Mr. Parker, I'm Dr. Reeves. I've been examining your father. Both Thomas and Jamal stood up. How is he? Thomas asked urgently. He's stable, Dr. Reeves assured them. It appears he experienced a hypotensive episode. His blood pressure dropped suddenly, causing dizziness and weakness. This can happen for various reasons, particularly in older adults. We're running some tests, but so far, there's no indication of a stroke or heart attack. The relief on Thomas's face was palpable. Can I see him? Yes, he's awake and alert now, room 312. Dr. Reeves glanced at Jamal. Family only, I'm afraid. He's with me, Thomas said firmly. My father will want to see him. Dr. Reeves nodded and led them through the maze of hospital corridors to Mr. Wilson's room. The old man looked smaller somehow against the white hospital sheets, an IV in his arm and a monitor beeping steadily beside him. His eyes were closed, but they opened as the door clicked shut behind them. Edward, Thomas said, approaching the bed. It struck Jamal that he called his father by his first name, not Dad or Father. Mr. Wilson's gaze moved from his son to Jamal, and a flicker of surprise crossed his face. The bicycle boy, he murmured. Jamal found you, Thomas explained. He called me. Mr. Wilson closed his eyes briefly. Shouldn't have bothered you. Bothered me? Thomas's voice rose slightly. Dad, you were collapsed on the floor. If Jamal hadn't come by... I would have managed, Mr. Wilson interrupted stubbornly. Jamal watched the interaction with growing discomfort. Despite the medical emergency, the tension between father and son remained palpable. He took a step back, wondering if he should leave them alone. Always so independent, Thomas said, a bitter edge to his voice. Even when you need help, you can't accept it. The way you couldn't accept that growth isn't always progress? Mr. Wilson retorted, suddenly more alert. The way you couldn't accept that some traditions are worth preserving? Jamal's discomfort deepened as he realized he was witnessing a continuation of a fight that had been going on for years. This wasn't just about today's medical scare. It was about decades of disagreement. I was trying to save the company. Thomas's controlled demeanor was slipping. The market was changing. We had to adapt or die. And in adapting, you destroyed everything that made Parker Automotive special. Mr. Wilson's voice was weak, but resolute. Quality, craftsmanship, Safety above all else. Is that what you think? Thomas's laugh was hollow. That I didn't care about safety? After what happened to Ryan, how could you even... He stopped abruptly, seeming to remember Jamal's presence. Both men fell silent, the beeping of the heart monitor suddenly loud in the quiet room. Jamal cleared his throat awkwardly. I'm glad you're okay, Mr. Wilson. I mean, Mr. Parker. The doctor said it was just low blood pressure. Mr. Wilson's face softened as he looked at Jamal. You shouldn't have gotten involved in an old man's problems, son, but thank you. He has his father's instincts, Thomas said quietly. Helping people seems to be in his blood. Something in the way Thomas said it made Jamal look up sharply. There was a weight to the words that suggested more than a casual observation. Mr. Wilson's expression changed too, his eyes narrowing slightly. His father, he repeated slowly. What was your father's name, boy? Miguel Silva, Jamal replied. He was a mechanic. The room went very still. Mr. Wilson's face had gone pale, and Thomas was looking between his father and Jamal with growing confusion. Silva, Mr. Wilson whispered. Not Miguel Silva, who worked in the specialty division? Around 2010 to 2018? Jamal's heart hammered in his chest. You knew my dad? Before Mr. Wilson could answer, the door swung open, and a nurse entered with a medicine tray. Time for your medication, Mr. Parker, she announced cheerfully. The moment was broken, but Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. Mr. Wilson knew his father. Had they worked together? What did this mean for the connections between their families? As the nurse checked Mr. Wilson's vital signs, Thomas drew Jamal aside. Let's give them some space for the medical stuff, he suggested, guiding Jamal back to the hallway. Once they were alone, Thomas studied Jamal with new interest. Your father worked at Parker Automotive. You never mentioned that. I didn't know for sure until last night, Jamal admitted. I found his old ID badge. My mom never talks much about his job there. Just that he worked at different garages after that. Thomas frowned thoughtfully. The timing would be right. The specialty division was one of the first my father let me restructure when I took over more responsibility. We had to let a lot of skilled workers go. While the nurse was still in with Mr. Wilson, the elevator at the end of the hall opened and Jamal's heart sank. His mother stepped out, still in her scrubs, her face a storm of worry and anger. Jamal Silva, she called out, striding toward them. What do you think you're doing? Mrs. Rodriguez saw you get into a car with a stranger and called me at work. Thomas straightened, extending his hand. Mrs. Silva, I can explain. You, Diana cut him off, ignoring his outstretched hand. You took my son without my permission? After I explicitly told you I didn't want him involved with your family? Mom, Mr. Wilson fell and needed help, Jamal tried to explain. I was just checking on his bike and found him on the floor. And you didn't think to call me first? Diana demanded, her voice tight with controlled fury. Instead, you called him. She jerked her head toward Thomas. I thought he should know his father was hurt, Jamal said defensively. Mrs. Silva, Thomas attempted again. I understand your anger, but Jamal may have saved my father's life today. The doctor said if he'd been on the floor much longer. I don't care what the doctor said, Diana snapped. You had no right to bring my son here without my knowledge or consent. Before the argument could escalate further, the nurse emerged from Mr. Wilson's room. He's asking for all of you, she said, looking curiously at the tense group. All of us? Diana repeated skeptically. The nurse nodded. He was quite insistent. Reluctantly, Diana followed Thomas and Jamal back into the room. Mr. Wilson was now sitting up slightly, his gaze sharp despite his frail appearance. Diana Silva, he said, his voice stronger than before. I remember you. You used to bring lunch to Miguel sometimes. Diana froze, her anger momentarily replaced by surprise. You remember me? I remember everyone who worked for me, Mr. Wilson said, "especially the best ones. And your husband was one of the finest mechanics Parker Automotive ever employed." While the nurse was in with Mr. Wilson, the elevator at the end of the hall opened and Jamal's heart sank. His mother stepped out, still in her scrubs, her face a storm of worry and anger. "Jamal Silva," she called out, striding toward them. "What do you think you're doing? Mrs. Rodriguez saw you get into a car with a stranger and called me at work." Thomas straightened, extending his hand. "Mrs. Silva, I can explain." "You!" Diana cut him off, ignoring his outstretched hand. "You took my son without my permission? After I explicitly told you I didn't want him involved with your family." "Mom, Mr. Wilson fell and needed help," Jamal tried to explain. "I was just checking on his bike and found him on the floor." "And you didn't think to call me first?" Diana demanded, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Instead, you called him." She jerked her head toward Thomas. "I thought he should know his father was hurt," Jamal said defensively. "Mrs. Silva," Thomas attempted again, "I understand your anger, but Jamal may have saved my father's life today. The doctor said if he'd been on the floor much longer—" "I don't care what the doctor said," Diana snapped. "You had no right to bring my son here without my knowledge or consent." Before the argument could escalate further, the nurse emerged from Mr. Wilson's room. "He's asking for all of you," she said, looking curiously at the tense group. "All of us?" Diana repeated skeptically. The nurse nodded. He was quite insistent. Reluctantly, Diana followed Thomas and Jamal back into the room. Mr. Wilson was now sitting up slightly, his gaze sharp despite his frail appearance. "Diana Silva," he said, his voice stronger than before. "I remember you. You used to bring lunch to Miguel sometimes." Diana froze, her anger momentarily replaced by surprise. "You remember me?" "I remember everyone who worked for me," Mr. Wilson said, "especially the best ones, and your husband was one of the finest mechanics Parker Automotive ever employed." While the nurse was in with Mr. Wilson, the elevator at the end of the hall opened, and Jamal's heart sank. His mother stepped out, still in her scrubs, her face a storm of worry and anger. "Jamal Silva," she called out, striding toward them. "What do you think you're doing? Mrs. Rodriguez saw you get into a car with a stranger and called me at work." Thomas straightened, extending his hand. "Mrs. Silva, I can explain—" "You," Diana cut him off, ignoring his outstretched hand. "You took my son without my permission? After I explicitly told you I didn't want him involved with your family?" "Mom, Mr. Wilson fell and needed help," Jamal tried to explain. "I was just checking on his bike and found him on the floor." "And you didn't think to call me first?" Diana demanded, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Instead, you called him?" She jerked her head toward Thomas. "I thought he should know his father was hurt," Jamal said defensively. "Mrs. Silva," Thomas attempted again, "I understand your anger, but Jamal may have saved my father's life today. The doctor said if he'd been on the floor much longer—" "I don't care what the doctor said," Diana snapped. "You had no right to bring my son here without my knowledge or consent." Before the argument could escalate further, the nurse emerged from Mr. Wilson's room. "He's asking for all of you," she said, looking curiously at the tense group. "All of us?" Diana repeated skeptically. The nurse nodded. He was quite insistent. Reluctantly, Diana followed Thomas and Jamal back into the room. Mr. Wilson was now sitting up slightly, his gaze sharp despite his frail appearance. "Diana Silva," he said, his voice stronger than before. "I remember you. You used to bring lunch to Miguel sometimes." Diana froze, her anger momentarily replaced by surprise. "You remember me?" "I remember everyone who worked for me," Mr. Wilson said, "especially the best ones. And your husband was one of the finest mechanics Parker Automotive ever employed." The badge lay on the kitchen counter between them, its faded blue and silver surface illuminated by the overhead light. Jamal watched his mother's face carefully, noting the subtle shift in her expression from surprise to something more complicated, pain perhaps, or reluctant recognition. She'd been quiet on the drive home from the hospital, her anger having subsided into a thoughtful silence that somehow felt more intimidating than her previous outburst. "Where did you find this?" Diana finally asked, not touching the badge as if it might burn her fingers. "In the box in your closet," Jamal admitted. "The one with Dad's things. I was looking for, I don't know, something to help me understand why Mr. Wilson seemed to recognize Dad's name." Diana sighed heavily and turned away, switching off the stove where she'd been absently heating water for tea. Neither of them would likely drink. When she turned back, her face had hardened into resolution. "Sit down, Jamal," she said, gesturing to the kitchen table. It wasn't a request. Jamal slid onto his usual chair, watching as his mother took the seat across from him, the badge now clutched in her hand. For a moment, she just stared at it, her thumb tracing the embossed logo of Parker Automotive. "Your father worked for Parker Automotive for 8 years, she began, her voice steady but distant, as if reciting a story she'd memorized long ago. "He started in the general maintenance division, but within 2 years, Edward Parker, Mr. Wilson, personally moved him to the specialty division. Miguel had a gift, you see. He could diagnose engine problems just by listening, could feel when something wasn't right in a transmission." Jamal nodded, a small surge of pride warming his chest. "Like how he taught me to listen to the different sounds tools make when they're working right." A fleeting smile touched Diana's lips. "Exactly like that. Your father believed that machines speak their own language, and he was fluent in it." The smile faded. "Edward Parker recognized that gift. For years, your father was one of the most respected mechanics at the company. Edward would bring him the most challenging cases, the prototype engines that weren't performing correctly, the custom builds for wealthy clients." "So Dad and Mr. Wilson were friends?" Jamal asked hopefully. Diana's expression tightened. "Not friends, no. But there was respect. Your father respected Mr. Parker's vision for quality over quantity, and Mr. Parker respected your father's skill." She paused, her fingers closing more tightly around the badge. "Then Thomas Parker began taking over more of the company's operations." "And things changed," Jamal guessed, remembering the tension between father and son at the hospital. "Everything changed," Diana confirmed. "Thomas had different ideas for the company. Expansion, mass production, cost-cutting. The specialty division was expensive to maintain, with its custom work and meticulous standards." "So they shut it down?" Jamal asked, already seeing where this was heading. Diana nodded slowly. "Not all at once. First, they reduced the staff. Then they limited the projects. And finally, about 3 years ago, they eliminated the division entirely." She set the badge down on the table between them. "Your father was among the last to go. Edward Parker himself delivered the news." Jamal's brow furrowed. "Mr. Wilson fired Dad? But he just said Dad was one of the best mechanics they ever had." "That's why it was so hard for your father to accept," Diana explained, her voice tightening with old anger. "He understood business decisions, but he believed that Edward Parker shared his values about craftsmanship and quality. Finding out that Mr. Parker would choose profit over principles, it shook your father's faith in what he did." "Is that why you never told me Dad worked there?" Jamal asked. "Because of how it ended?" Diana sighed again, seeming to deflate slightly. "Partly. And partly because after the layoff, things were difficult for us. Your father had to take whatever mechanic jobs he could find. The smaller garages paid less and had fewer safety protocols. He was working longer hours in worse conditions." A cold realization dawned on Jamal. The accident? Was it because of those conditions? Diana's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "The garage where he was working that night, they were rushing a job for an important client. The lift they were using was old, hadn't been properly maintained. When it failed, she trailed off, unable to finish. So it wouldn't have happened if he was still at Parker Automotive, Jamal said, his voice barely above a whisper. We can't know that for certain, Diana answered, though her tone suggested otherwise. But Parker Automotive always had the best equipment, the strictest safety standards. Edward Parker was fanatic about that, according to your father. Jamal sat in stunned silence, trying to process this new information. The connections between his family and the Parkers ran deeper than he'd imagined, threaded with loss and regret on both sides. Does Mr. Wilson know? He finally asked. About the accident? About how Dad died? Diana shook her head. I don't think so. After the layoffs, we didn't maintain any contact with Parker Automotive. Your father was too proud to reach out, and I was too angry on his behalf. But today, at the hospital, Jamal said, Mr. Wilson recognized you. He remembered Dad. Edward Parker has an excellent memory for people, Diana acknowledged. But remembering someone and caring about what happened to them are two different things. Jamal frowned, thinking about the old man in the hospital bed, how his eyes had lit up with recognition at the mention of Miguel Silva. I think he does care, Jamal said slowly. He seemed sad when he was talking about Dad being one of the best mechanics. Diana's expression hardened again. Jamal, I need you to understand something. The Parkers live in a different world from us. To them, your father was an employee. A good one, maybe, but still just someone who worked for them. When it became financially convenient to let him go, they did, without considering what it would mean for our family. But what if it wasn't Mr. Wilson's decision? Jamal pressed. You heard them arguing at the hospital. Thomas was the one pushing for all those changes, not his dad. It doesn't matter whose decision it was, Diana insisted, though with less conviction than before. Your father is gone, and getting involved with the Parkers now won't bring him back. Jamal picked up the badge, studying his father's smiling face in the small ID photo. He looked younger, happier, a man at the height of his career, proud of where he worked. What if it's not about bringing Dad back? Jamal asked quietly. What if it's about something else? Diana studied her son's face. Like what? Like justice, maybe? Or closure? Jamal struggled to articulate the feeling growing inside him. Mr. Wilson misses his son. Thomas misses his dad. And they're both still here. Both still have a chance to fix things. Isn't that worth something? Diana reached across the table and took Jamal's hand. It's not your responsibility to fix their family, honey. But what if I can help? Jamal insisted. Dad always said helping others is never wasted effort, even if it doesn't work out exactly how you planned. A sad smile touched Diana's lips. He did say that, didn't he? She squeezed Jamal's hand. You're so much like him sometimes, it takes my breath away. They sat in silence for a moment, the badge between them a bridge, connecting past and present. Loss and possibility. I should call Thomas Parker, Jamal said suddenly, with a determination that surprised even himself. He should know about Dad, about how his company's decisions affected real people. Jamal, Diana cautioned, I'm not sure that's a good idea. Thomas Parker is a powerful businessman. He might not appreciate a 12-year-old boy telling him his business practices cost someone their life. I'm not going to accuse him, Jamal clarified. I just think he should know. He seemed genuinely sorry about the people who lost their jobs. Maybe knowing about Dad will help him understand why his father was so against selling the company to those investors. Diana looked skeptical. And what do you hope to accomplish with this? Jamal considered the question seriously. Maybe nothing. But Mr. Wilson helped Dad become a better mechanic. Dad taught me everything he knew. It feels like we're all connected somehow, and ignoring that connection doesn't seem right. Diana was quiet for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she stood up and walked to the counter where her purse lay. From it, she extracted Thomas Parker's business card. If you're determined to do this, she said, returning to the table, then we do it together. I don't want you meeting with him alone again. Jamal nodded eagerly, relief washing over him. So I can call him? We can call him, Diana corrected, her protective instinct clearly still in full force. Tomorrow. It's too late tonight, and we both need some rest. She pushed back from the table. And Jamal? No more going to Mr. Wilson's house without telling me first. Promise me. I promise, Jamal agreed readily. Do you think Mr. Wilson will be okay? In the hospital, I mean. The doctor seemed to think it was just low blood pressure. Diana reassured him. He'll probably be released tomorrow. Patients his age rarely stay longer than necessary, unless there are complications. That night, as Jamal lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about the tangled connections between his family and the Parkers. It was like one of the complex engines his father used to describe, each part affecting the others in ways that weren't always obvious until you stepped back and saw the whole system. He thought about Mr. Wilson alone in that hospital room, about Thomas's grief for his own son, about his father's pride in his work at Parker Automotive. There were broken pieces everywhere, but maybe, just maybe, they could still be fixed. With that thought in mind, Jamal reached for the phone on his nightstand and dialed the number on Thomas Parker's business card. It rang only twice before Thomas answered. This is Thomas Parker. Jamal took a deep breath. Mr. Parker, it's Jamal. I need to tell you something important about my dad. He didn't just work for Parker Automotive. He was fired during your cost-cutting, and that decision eventually led to him taking a job at the garage where he died. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for so long that Jamal thought the call had dropped. He checked the screen. Still connected, timer still running. Finally, Thomas Parker's voice returned, strained and quiet. Jamal, I think this is a conversation we should have in person, not over the phone. Are you free tomorrow after school? Jamal glanced at his bedroom door, aware that his mother would be furious if she knew he'd made this call without her. Yes, but my mom would want to be there too. Of course, Thomas replied. That's appropriate. There's a cafe called Bridgeway near your school. Would 4 o'clock work? After agreeing to the meeting and hanging up, Jamal lay awake, anxiety and anticipation battling in his chest. How would he tell his mother what he'd done? How would Thomas react when they discussed his father face to face? Eventually, exhaustion won out, and he drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next day passed in a blur. Jamal confessed to his mother over breakfast about the late-night call, weathering her disappointment and anger with quiet persistence until she reluctantly agreed to accompany him to the meeting. By the time the final school bell rang, his stomach was tied in knots. Bridgeway Cafe was a modest establishment halfway between Jamal's school and the business district where Parker Automotive's headquarters stood. When Jamal and Diana arrived, Thomas was already there, seated at a corner table away from other patrons. He wore a less formal outfit than before, slacks and a button-down shirt without a tie, but still exuded the confidence of a man accustomed to boardrooms rather than coffee shops. He stood as they approached, offering his hand first to Diana, who shook it with obvious reluctance, then to Jamal, who noticed the slight tremor in the businessman's grip. "Thank you for coming," Thomas said, gesturing for them to sit. "I ordered some refreshments. Hope that's all right." A server appeared with a tray bearing a pot of coffee, a hot chocolate for Jamal, and an assortment of pastries that remained untouched as they settled into an uncomfortable silence. Jamal placed his father's Parker Automotive ID badge on the table between them. Thomas stared at it, his expression unreadable. "Miguel Silva," Thomas finally said, reading the name on the badge. "Specialty Division. I remember the division, of course, but I didn't make the connection until your call last night." "My husband worked for Parker Automotive for 8 years," Diana said, her voice controlled but tense. "He was part of the final group laid off when the specialty division was eliminated." Thomas nodded slowly. 3 years ago, It was part of a larger restructuring initiative to make the company more competitive. That's what the letter said, Diana replied. Very corporate, very clean. It didn't mention what happens when a specialized mechanic in his 40s suddenly has to find new work in a market that favors younger, less expensive employees. Thomas winced slightly. The transition packages we offered were generous by industry standards, Diana finished for him. 6 months' salary, healthcare coverage for 3, a glowing recommendation letter, but none of that created new jobs that matched his skills or salary. Jamal watched Thomas carefully, seeing the businessman's polished veneer cracking under the weight of specific human consequences he'd never had to face directly. After Parker Automotive, Jamal said, picking up the thread, Dad had to take jobs at smaller garages, places that couldn't afford the safety equipment your company had. Thomas's expression darkened. The accident, he said quietly. You mentioned it involved equipment failure. Diana's hands tightened around her coffee cup. A hydraulic lift that hadn't been properly maintained. It collapsed while he was working underneath a vehicle. The color drained from Thomas's face. I'm so sorry, he whispered. Truly, I had no idea. That's the problem, isn't it? Diana said, her voice rising slightly. You never saw the faces behind the numbers on your spreadsheets. You never had to witness what happens when profit margins become more important than people. Thomas didn't flinch from her anger. Instead, he seemed to absorb it, nodding slightly, as if accepting a deserved rebuke. You're right, he said simply. I didn't see the human cost. I saw efficiency metrics and market positioning and quarterly projections. It was easier that way. Jamal, who had been quiet, finally spoke up. Mr. Wilson, I mean your dad, he seemed to know my dad was good at his job. Why didn't he stop the layoffs? Thomas sighed, rubbing his temples. My father and I have had a complicated relationship for many years. When I began taking more control of the company's operations, he disagreed with many of my decisions, but he allowed me to make them. He believed I needed to learn from my own mistakes. So firing my dad was your decision, not his? Jamal pressed. The restructuring plan was mine, Thomas admitted. But my father, as CEO at the time, signed off on it. He could have overruled me, but he didn't. He looked directly at Jamal. I think that's part of why he retired shortly afterward. He couldn't reconcile his vision for the company with the direction I was taking it. Diana's expression remained hard. So neither of you is entirely innocent or entirely guilty. That's fair, Thomas acknowledged. He hesitated, then asked, Did your husband ever mention my father? Their interactions. Diana's expression softened slightly. Miguel respected Edward Parker enormously. He said Mr. Parker understood that cars weren't just machines, but expressions of human creativity and ingenuity. When Miguel would solve particularly difficult problems, Mr. Parker would sometimes come down to the shop floor personally to see the work. Thomas smiled sadly. That sounds like my father. He never saw himself as above the mechanics. In fact, I think he felt more comfortable with them than with other executives. Which makes it even harder to understand why he would approve laying off someone he respected, Diana said. Thomas's phone chimed suddenly, breaking the tension. He glanced at it and his expression changed dramatically. It's the hospital, he said, quickly answering. Yes, this is Thomas Parker. His face paled as he listened. I understand. I'll be right there. He ended the call, already rising from his chair. My father's had a setback. His blood pressure dropped again, more severely this time. They're running additional tests. Diana's nurse instincts immediately surfaced. Recurrent hypotensive episodes could indicate several serious conditions. Has he been taking his medications regularly? I don't know, Thomas admitted. We haven't been close enough for me to know those details. Jamal looked between his mother and Thomas, feeling the weight of the moment. "We should go with you," he said suddenly. "Jamal," Diana began, but her son cut her off. "Mom, I know you're angry about what happened to Dad. I am too. But Mr. Wilson is in the hospital, and he knew Dad, and he's all alone except for Thomas, who he doesn't even talk to. Wouldn't Dad want us to help if we could?" Diana looked at her son with a mixture of exasperation and pride. Before she could respond, Thomas spoke. "You have every right to your anger, Mrs. Silva. What happened to your husband was a tragedy that might have been prevented if different decisions had been made, decisions I was part of. But your son is right. My father is alone, and despite our differences, I don't want him to be." Diana seemed torn, the nurse in her battling with the grieving widow. Finally, she nodded. "We'll come to the hospital, but this doesn't change anything about the past." "I understand," Thomas said, "and I'm grateful." The ride to Mercy General passed in tense silence, each passenger lost in their own thoughts. Jamal stared out the window of Thomas's luxury car, thinking about how quickly life could change, how a simple bike repair had somehow connected his family to the Parkers in ways he never could have imagined. When they arrived at the hospital, Thomas led them directly to his father's room. The scene inside was alarming. Medical staff hovered around the bed where Mr. Wilson lay, looking frailer than before, attached to additional monitors and an oxygen cannula. A doctor stepped away from the bed as they entered. "Mr. Parker," she acknowledged Thomas. "Your father's condition has stabilized, but we're concerned about these recurrent, hypotensive episodes. They could indicate cardiovascular issues that weren't apparent in our initial tests." "Is he conscious?" Thomas asked. "Yes, but groggy from the medication we've given him to help regulate his blood pressure." The doctor noticed Diana and Jamal. "Family only in the room right now, I'm afraid." "They are family," Thomas said firmly, "in all the ways that matter." The doctor nodded and stepped aside, allowing them to approach the bed. Mr. Wilson's eyes were closed, but they fluttered open as Thomas spoke his name. His gaze moved from his son to Diana and Jamal, confusion giving way to recognition. "The Silva family," he murmured, his voice weak but clear. "You came back." "We heard you weren't feeling well," Jamal said, moving closer to the bed. "We were worried." Mr. Wilson's eyes found Diana's. "Your husband," he said. "Miguel. Thomas told me what happened, the accident." His voice cracked slightly. "I should never have let him go. Best damn mechanic we ever had." Diana's composure wavered, tears threatening. "He always spoke highly of you, Mr. Parker." "I signed the papers," Mr. Wilson continued, seeming determined to speak despite his weakness. "For the layoffs. Thomas drafted them, but I signed. The responsibility is mine." Thomas moved to the opposite side of the bed. "Dad, you don't need to do this now. You need to rest." Mr. Wilson shook his head stubbornly. No more waiting. No more silence. He reached a trembling hand toward Diana. "After the restructuring, I tried to track Miguel down. Wanted to offer him a position in my personal workshop. Thomas blocked it. Said it would undermine the restructuring, create liability." Diana looked sharply at Thomas, who had gone very still. "Is that true?" "Yes," Thomas admitted, his voice barely audible. "I convinced him it would send the wrong message to rehire someone we'd just laid off. I didn't want exceptions compromising the plan, even for someone with Miguel's talents." The weight of this revelation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Jamal looked between the three adults, seeing pain etched on each face, pain that stemmed from different sources but formed a tangled web connecting them all. "If I had stood up to my son," Mr. Wilson continued, his voice growing weaker, "insisted on bringing Miguel back, perhaps he would still be alive today." Diana's tears finally spilled over. "You can't know that for certain. Accidents happen, even in the safest workplaces." "But the probability would have been lower," Mr. Wilson insisted. "That's what engineering is about. reducing the probability of failure. Thomas stood frozen, the full impact of the chain of events seeming to hit him all at once. His father's opposition to his business decisions, the layoffs, Miguel Silva's death, Jamal's fatherless childhood, a line of dominoes that had begun falling with his push for corporate restructuring. Mr. Wilson's monitors beeped as his blood pressure dipped again, bringing a nurse hurrying into the room. "I need to ask you all to step outside," she said firmly. "The patient needs to remain calm." As they moved toward the door, Mr. Wilson called out weakly, "Thomas, the company. Don't sell it, not yet." In the hallway, the three stood in awkward silence until Diana spoke. "I should take Jamal home. This is a lot to process." Thomas nodded, looking shell-shocked. "Of course, I can call you a cab or—" "We'll manage," Diana interrupted, though her tone had lost some of its earlier sharpness. As Diana guided Jamal toward the elevator, Thomas called after them. "Mrs. Silva? Diana, what your husband built at Parker Automotive. It mattered. The designs he worked on, they're still in use today. Some of our safest vehicles incorporate his innovations." Diana paused but didn't turn around. That would have meant a lot to him. In the elevator, Jamal finally asked the question that had been building since their arrival at the hospital. "Mom, what happens now? Between us and the Parkers?" Diana sighed deeply, her anger seemingly deflated by the weight of all they'd learned. "I don't know, honey. Some broken things can't be fixed." "But some can," Jamal persisted. "Dad always said that." As the elevator doors opened to the lobby, Diana wrapped an arm around her son's shoulders. "Your father was an optimist. It's one of the things I loved most about him." She paused. "And one of the things I love most about you." While the doctors worked with Mr. Wilson, Thomas placed his hand on Jamal's shoulder and said in a voice almost inaudible, "My father demitted your father. My ambition made your father work where he ended up dying, and now, somehow inexplicably, you are the only person who seems capable of fixing what we both broke." The antiseptic smell of the hospital hung in the air as Jamal sat in the waiting room, his untouched cup of vending machine hot chocolate growing cold between his hands. Thomas paced back and forth, his expensive shoes clicking rhythmically against the linoleum floor. The silence between them was broken only by the occasional announcement over the PA system or the distant beeping of medical equipment. Diana had stepped out to make a phone call to her supervisor, explaining that she needed to take the rest of the day off. Jamal watched Thomas, noticing how the businessman's polished exterior had crumbled over the past hour. His hair was disheveled from running his hands through it repeatedly, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes haunted. "He'll be okay," Jamal offered, not knowing if it was true, but feeling compelled to break the oppressive silence. "The doctor said they're just being cautious with the additional tests." Thomas paused his pacing and looked at Jamal as if seeing him for the first time in hours. "Yes," he said distractedly. "The doctors here are excellent." He sank into the chair beside Jamal, his shoulders slumped. "I never asked him about his medications, his diet, his health routines. What kind of son doesn't know these things about his aging father?" Jamal fidgeted with his cup. "My mom says people show love in different ways. Maybe yours is just different." Thomas gave a hollow laugh. "Is that what you call it? Ignoring your father for years, dismantling everything he built, preparing to sell his life's work to strangers?" He shook his head. "No, I wasn't showing love in a different way. I wasn't showing it at all." Before Jamal could respond, Diana returned, her face tight with controlled emotion. She sat on Jamal's other side, creating a buffer between her son and Thomas. "They're going to keep him overnight for observation," she said, having spoken with the nursing staff. "The cardiologist wants to run a few more tests in the morning." Thomas nodded. "Thank you for finding that out. You didn't have to." "Professional habit," Diana replied curtly. "We should go, Jamal. We've done all we can here. But, Jamal began to protest. It's getting late, Diana insisted, her tone brooking no argument. And you have school tomorrow. Thomas straightened, seeming to gather the remnants of his business persona. Of course, I can have my driver take you home. That won't be necessary, Diana interrupted. We'll take the bus. Mom, Jamal said quietly, it's a 45-minute ride with transfers. Mr. Parker's driver could get us home in 15 minutes. Diana's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, a doctor emerged from the double doors leading to the patient rooms. Mr. Parker? He called, scanning the waiting area. Thomas immediately stood. Yes, that's me. Your father is stable now, the doctor explained. We've adjusted his medication, and he seems to be responding well. He's asking for you, and specifically mentioned he wants to see the boy and his mother as well. Diana tensed. We were just leaving. Please, Thomas said, turning to face her fully. Just for a few minutes, he seems different since you both came. More like his old self. If your presence gives him comfort right now, I'm begging you to stay a little longer. Jamal looked up at his mother, his expression pleading. After a long moment, Diana sighed. 5 minutes, she conceded. Then we really need to go. They followed the doctor through the double doors and down a corridor to Mr. Wilson's room. The elderly man was indeed looking better than before. His color had improved, and he was sitting up slightly in bed. The oxygen cannula remained, but some of the monitoring equipment had been removed. You're still here, Mr. Wilson said, his voice stronger than earlier, his gaze fixed on Jamal and Diana with what seemed like genuine pleasure. We wanted to make sure you were okay before we left, Jamal explained, moving closer to the bed. Mr. Wilson nodded, then shifted his attention to Thomas. Son, I need to speak with you. With all of you. There are things that need to be said while I still have the clarity to say them. Thomas moved to his father's bedside, concern etched on his face. Dad, the doctor said you need to rest to keep your blood pressure stable. What I need, Mr. Wilson said with unexpected firmness, is to clear my conscience. I've carried these regrets for too long. He turned to Diana. Mrs. Silva, I owe you and your family an apology that comes far too late. I knew Miguel was exceptional. I knew the restructuring Thomas proposed would eliminate positions that were valuable beyond their profit margins. But I was tired of fighting. Tired of being seen as outdated, resistant to necessary change. Diana's composure wavered slightly. Mr. Parker, Edward, please, he insisted. When Thomas presented the restructuring plan, I recognized it was the culmination of years of disagreement between us about the company's direction. I could have blocked it entirely. I was still CEO. Instead, I chose what I thought was a middle path. I approved the plan, but insisted on generous severance packages. The severance helped us for a while, Diana acknowledged quietly. But Miguel needed more than money. He needed purpose, meaningful work. Mr. Wilson nodded, pain evident in his eyes. I realized that too late. When I tried to find him afterward, to offer him a position in my personal workshop, Thomas convinced me it would undermine the entire restructuring effort. His gaze shifted to his son, and I, foolishly, listened. Thomas stood rigidly by the bed, his face ashen. Dad, I had no idea Miguel would end up in an unsafe workplace. I was thinking about the company's image, about consistent messaging, about numbers on spreadsheets, Mr. Wilson finished for him. Just as I was thinking about my relationship with you, rather than my responsibility to the people who had served Parker Automotive faithfully for years. He reached out a trembling hand, which Thomas hesitantly took. We're both culpable, son. My silence was as damaging as your action. Jamal watched this exchange with growing discomfort. The weight of these adult recriminations and regrets felt overwhelming, connecting to his own loss in ways he hadn't fully processed. Diana seemed similarly affected. This doesn't change anything, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Miguel is still gone. Jamal still grew up without his father. Nothing can change the past, Mr. Wilson agreed solemnly, but perhaps something can be done about the future. He looked at Thomas. The company. Have you finalized the sale? Thomas shook his head. Not yet. The final papers are scheduled to be signed next week. Cancel it, Mr. Wilson said firmly. Parker Automotive shouldn't belong to foreign investors who care nothing for its legacy or the community it serves. Dad, the market has changed. Small automotive manufacturers can't compete with the giants anymore. The offer is generous. I'm not suggesting we keep it as it is, Mr. Wilson interrupted. I'm suggesting we transform it. Return to our roots of innovation and quality, but with a new focus. Thomas looked skeptical. What kind of focus? Education, Mr. Wilson said, his gaze moving to Jamal. Training. Creating the next generation of skilled mechanics and engineers from communities that have been overlooked. He turned back to Diana. A foundation that would offer scholarships, apprenticeships, real opportunities, bearing Miguel Silva's name. The room fell silent. Diana's hand went to her throat, her eyes wide with surprise. Thomas stared at his father as if seeing him anew. You want to convert part of Parker Automotive into an educational foundation? Thomas asked slowly. Not convert, expand, Mr. Wilson corrected. The company can continue its manufacturing, but with renewed emphasis on quality over quantity. And alongside it, the Miguel Silva Foundation can train young people like Jamal, who have the natural talent and passion for this work. Jamal felt a surge of complicated emotions. Pride at hearing his father's name spoken with such respect, confusion about this sudden proposal, hope at the possibility of honoring his father's legacy. This seems sudden, Diana said cautiously. A convenient way to assuage guilt. Mr. Wilson nodded. Perhaps it is, in part, but it's also the right thing to do. Something I should have considered years ago. He fixed his gaze on Diana. The foundation would need leadership, someone who understands both education and the real-world impact of what we're trying to accomplish. Someone like you, Mrs. Silva. Diana stepped back as if physically struck. Me? I'm a nurse, not an educator or business person. You're a mother who's raised a remarkable young man despite tremendous loss, Mr. Wilson countered. You're a professional who understands discipline and care, and you knew Miguel better than anyone. You would ensure his vision and values were honored. Thomas, who had been silent, suddenly straightened. It could work, he said, sounding surprised at his own words. The legal structure would be complicated, but not impossible. We could allocate a percentage of annual profits to fund the foundation, establish a separate board. This is too much, Diana interrupted, shaking her head. Jamal, we need to go. This is overwhelming. Jamal stood rooted in place, his mind racing. This proposal represented everything he'd dreamed of. A connection to his father, a future in mechanics, a way to help others like himself. But he also recognized his mother's distress. Mom, he said quietly, can we at least think about it? Diana looked at her son, conflict evident in her expression. Jamal, these are big decisions, complicated ones. We can't just... Mrs. Silva, Mr. Wilson interjected gently. Nothing needs to be decided tonight. All I ask is that you consider the possibility, that you allow us the chance to create something meaningful from this tragedy. The monitors beside the bed began beeping more rapidly, indicating Mr. Wilson's rising heart rate. A nurse appeared in the doorway, her expression concerned. I think that's enough excitement for now, she said firmly. Mr. Parker needs to rest. Diana nodded, visibly relieved by the interruption. Yes, we should go. Come on, Jamal. Before you leave, Mr. Wilson said, his voice weakening as the excitement took its toll. Thomas will ensure you get home safely. And Jamal." He reached toward the bedside table where a small notebook lay. "Please take this. It's a draft of some ideas for the foundation. Look it over if you'd like." Jamal accepted the notebook hesitantly, glancing at his mother for permission. Diana didn't object, though her expression remained guarded. As they left the room, Jamal glanced back to see Thomas sitting beside his father's bed, their hands still joined, quiet words passing between them that he couldn't hear. In the hallway, Diana leaned against the wall, closing her eyes briefly. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," she murmured. "Getting pulled into their world, their problems, their attempts to rewrite history. Or maybe it's a chance to make something good come from something terrible," Jamal suggested quietly. Before Diana could respond, Thomas emerged from his father's room, his expression solemn. "The nurse asked me to step out while they check his vital signs," he explained. "Let me arrange transportation for you." Diana looked as if she might refuse again, but fatigue won out. "Fine. Thank you." As they walked toward the elevator, Thomas asked, "Did my father give you the notebook?" Jamal nodded, holding it up. "He's been working on those ideas since he woke up the first time," Thomas explained. "It's the most engaged I've seen him in years." The elevator arrived, and they stepped inside in awkward silence. As the doors closed, Thomas said quietly, "Whatever you decide, I want you to know I'm committed to making this right. Somehow. Not just the foundation idea, but acknowledging the real impact our business decisions had on real people." "A foundation with my husband's name," Diana repeated slowly, her defenses finally lowering. "Perhaps that's how we repair what's broken, not by pretending the accident never happened, but by building something new from the pieces that remained." A new day dawned as Jamal approached the hospital entrance, the small toolkit his father had given him years ago clutched in his hand. Inside its worn canvas case were the essential tools that had connected him to his father's memory. Screwdrivers, pliers, a small wrench set, all meticulously maintained. His mother had raised an eyebrow when he'd packed it that morning, but hadn't objected. Something had shifted in her since their last conversation with the Parkers, a subtle softening around the edges of her grief and anger. "Just a short visit," she'd cautioned as she dropped him off, needing to report for her nursing shift at County. "Thomas said he'd drive you home afterward." Jamal made his way through the hospital corridors, now familiar with the route to Mr. Wilson's room. He found the elderly man sitting up in bed, looking remarkably improved from the previous day. The oxygen cannula was gone, and some color had returned to his face. His eyes brightened when he spotted Jamal in the doorway. "The bicycle boy," Mr. Wilson said, his voice stronger than before. Come in. Jamal approached the bed, suddenly shy. "I brought something to show you," he said, lifting the toolkit. "My dad's tools, the ones he taught me with." Mr. Wilson's eyes widened with genuine interest. "May I?" he asked, holding out a hand. Jamal carefully placed the toolkit on the bed beside Mr. Wilson, who opened it with reverent hands. The old man ran his fingers over each tool, examining them with the practiced eye of someone who understood their value beyond their utility. "Excellent quality," he murmured. "Well maintained, too. Your father taught you proper care." "He said tools tell their own stories," Jamal explained. "How they're handled, how they're stored. It all shows in how they perform when you need them." Mr. Wilson nodded appreciatively. A wise philosophy. He picked up a screwdriver, testing its balance in his palm. "This set reminds me of my first professional toolkit. Not as fancy as what came later, but reliable. Honest." He returned the tool to its place. "Thank you for sharing this with me." A movement at the door caught their attention. Thomas stood there, his usual business attire replaced by a casual button-down shirt and slacks. He carried a leather portfolio and what looked like several architectural drawings. "Good morning," Thomas said, sounding surprised to find Jamal already there. "You're here early." "Mom had an early shift," Jamal explained. "She dropped me off on her way to work." Thomas nodded, then turned to his father. "You're looking better today." "Feel better too," Mr. Wilson confirmed. "Doctor says my numbers are improving. Might release me tomorrow if all continues well." His eyes moved to the materials Thomas carried. "What have you brought?" Thomas hesitated, glancing at Jamal. "Some preliminary ideas for the project we discussed, but we can look at them later if—" "No, now is perfect," Mr. Wilson insisted. "Jamal should see them too. After all, this foundation would honor his father." Thomas carefully laid out several drawings on the overbed table. They were architectural renderings of a building labeled the Miguel Silva Technical Education Center. "These are just conceptual at this stage," Thomas explained, "but I spoke with our development team this morning. The old workshop building on Oak Street, the original Parker Automotive site, has been sitting unused since we consolidated operations. It could be renovated to serve as the Foundation's headquarters and main training facility." Jamal stared at the drawings, a strange tightness in his chest. The renderings showed a modern facility with large, well-lit workspaces, classrooms, and what looked like a small museum area dedicated to automotive history. "This is real?" he asked, his voice small. "You're really going to do this?" Thomas met Jamal's gaze directly. "If your mother agrees to be involved, yes. I've already instructed our legal team to pause the sale negotiations. This is a better path forward, one that honors both my father's legacy and yours." Mr. Wilson reached for one of the drawings, studying it intently. "The original workshop," he said, nostalgia evident in his voice. "Where Parker Automotive began. Seems fitting it should become a place of beginning for others, too." "The location is ideal," Thomas continued, warming to the subject. "Close to several schools, accessible by public transportation. We could start with after-school programs, weekend workshops, eventually develop full certification courses." Jamal traced the outline of the building with his finger, imagining himself in those spaces, learning and eventually teaching others. Could I be part of it somehow?" "You would be our first student," Thomas said without hesitation. "And eventually perhaps an instructor. Your natural talent with mechanical work is exactly what we'd hope to nurture in others." Mr. Wilson chuckled softly. "First student? I'd say he's already qualified to teach some basics. That bicycle repair was masterful." Thomas smiled, a genuine expression that softened his usually serious face. "You might be right about that." The door opened again, and to everyone's surprise, Diana entered, still in her nursing scrubs. Her eyes widened at the scene before her, the architectural drawings spread across the table, the three males huddled around them like conspirators. "Diana," Thomas acknowledged, straightening. "We weren't expecting you." "I had a break between patients," she explained, moving to Jamal's side. "Thought I'd check how things were going." Her eyes scanned the drawings. "What's all this?" "Mom, look," Jamal said excitedly, pointing to the renderings. "They're really going to do it. A whole education center with Dad's name." Diana's expression was unreadable as she examined the drawings. "This is elaborate," she finally said. "Just initial concepts," Thomas clarified. "Nothing finalized. Every aspect would require your input and approval." "And funding?" Diana asked pointedly. "How sustainable would this be?" Thomas opened his portfolio and extracted a financial overview. "We would establish an endowment from a percentage of Parker Automotive's existing assets, plus annual contributions from ongoing operations. The foundation would be legally separate from the company, but would receive guaranteed support." Mr. Wilson leaned forward. "I'm also prepared to contribute personally from my own holdings. This matters to me, Diana. Creating something meaningful from my mistakes." Diana's professional composure wavered slightly. She picked up one of the drawings, studying it closely. Miguel would have loved this, she admitted quietly. Teaching was always his dream, before reality demanded a more practical path. Then help us make it his legacy, Mr. Wilson urged gently. Not just the name on the building, but the spirit of the place. That should be Miguel's contribution. Diana set the drawing down carefully. I have patients to return to, she said, her voice composed but with an undercurrent of emotion. But I'm willing to discuss this further, perhaps this weekend when we all have more time. The relief on both Parker's faces was evident. Thomas nodded. Saturday? We could meet at the old workshop site, see the space in person. Saturday morning would work, Diana confirmed. She leaned down to kiss Jamal's forehead. I need to get back. Thomas, you'll make sure Jamal gets home. Absolutely, Thomas assured her. After Diana left, the room fell into a comfortable silence as they continued examining the plans. Jamal noticed Mr. Wilson trying to suppress a yawn. You should rest, Jamal suggested. Mom says rest is the best medicine. Your mother sounds very wise, Mr. Wilson acknowledged. But before I rest, I wanted to show you something. He reached for the drawer in his bedside table, extracting a small box. Thomas, could you help me sit up a bit more? Thomas adjusted the bed controls, then supported his father's shoulders as he shifted to a more upright position. Mr. Wilson opened the box, revealing an antique radio, small, with a wooden case and brass dials. Been in my nightstand drawer since I was admitted, he explained. Nurse was kind enough to bring it from home. It's not working properly, though. Reception is spotty, and there's a strange buzzing when it does work. Jamal looked at the radio with interest. May I? He asked, reaching for it. Mr. Wilson handed it over. It was my father's, one of the few possessions I have from him. Jamal examined the radio carefully, turning it over in his hands with the same gentle respect Mr. Wilson had shown his toolkit. The antenna connection is loose, he observed, pointing to a small joint. And this capacitor looks like it might be going bad. Can you fix it? Mr. Wilson asked. Jamal opened his toolkit, extracting a small screwdriver. I think so. The basics of radios haven't changed much, even in old models like this. As Jamal worked on the radio, Thomas and Mr. Wilson watched in silence. His hands moved with confidence, removing the back panel, testing connections, tightening loose components. You have a natural talent, Mr. Wilson commented. Just like your father must have had. Jamal smiled, focused on his task. Dad always said mechanical things make sense in a way people sometimes don't. There's always a reason something isn't working, and usually a way to fix it. Wise man, Mr. Wilson murmured. 20 minutes later, Jamal reassembled the radio and turned it on. Clear music filled the room, a classical piece that made Mr. Wilson's eyes light up. Beethoven's Seventh, he identified. Perfect reception, remarkable. Thomas checked his watch. I should take you home, Jamal. Your mother will worry. Before you go, Mr. Wilson said, I wanted to ask about your idea of fixing bicycles for neighborhood children, Jamal. Thomas mentioned it. Jamal nodded. Just something I thought might be good practice. Lots of kids in my neighborhood have bikes with problems, but their families can't afford repairs. An excellent initiative, Mr. Wilson approved. Perhaps a pilot program for the foundation? Thomas nodded thoughtfully. We could set up a small workshop space immediately, even before the full renovation. Provide tools, parts, mentorship. You'd do that? Jamal asked, surprised. Why not? Thomas replied. It's a perfect starting point. Tangible, immediately beneficial to the community, and aligned with the Foundation's mission. Mr. Wilson reached for Jamal's hand. Your father would be proud of you, son. Not just for your skills, but for your heart. As Thomas drove Jamal home, they discussed practical aspects of the bicycle repair project. By the time they reached Jamal's apartment building, A plan was taking shape. "I'll have some basic supplies delivered tomorrow," Thomas promised. "Tools, spare parts, a workbench for your building's common area. If your mother approves, of course." "She will," Jamal said confidently, "especially when she sees how many kids need help with their bikes." That evening, as Diana reviewed the portfolio Thomas had sent home with Jamal, her expression softened with each page. "Your father would have loved this," she admitted. "Teaching young people, passing on his skills." "So we're really going to do it?" Jamal asked hopefully. Diana closed the portfolio, her decision evident in her eyes. "We're going to try," she said, "for your father, and for you, and maybe for all of us who need to find purpose in what happened." While she saw the child and her son eagerly flipping through the pages, Diana observed something else too: the shadow of the man he would become, a bridge between what his father had been and what he himself might yet be. The foundation might bear Miguel's name, but it would be Jamal's future it would help shape. 3 days after Mr. Wilson was discharged from the hospital, a transformation began. The elderly man insisted on going home rather than staying with Thomas, claiming he needed his independence. But he agreed to daily visits from a home health aide. What surprised everyone was how quickly he regained his strength once back in familiar surroundings. The morning sun filtered through the windows of Mr. Wilson's modest house as Jamal helped him adjust a cushion behind his back. The living room had been rearranged to accommodate Mr. Wilson's recovery, his favorite armchair positioned for easy access, a side table laden with medications, water, and a phone within reach. "Much better," Mr. Wilson said, settling into the chair. "Hospitals have their place, but nothing heals like home." Thomas entered from the kitchen carrying a tray with tea and toast. He'd shed his business persona almost entirely over the past few days, appearing in casual clothes, his normally immaculate hair slightly disheveled. The change made him look younger, more approachable. "The doctor said your last blood pressure reading was perfect," Thomas reported, setting the tray down. "Keep this up, and you'll be back to full strength in no time." Mr. Wilson waved away the concern. "I'm fine. What I want to hear about is the progress on the foundation. Has Diana decided to accept the position?" Thomas glanced at Jamal, who was organizing Mr. Wilson's medication into a weekly pill organizer. "We're meeting with her tomorrow to discuss the details. She seems inclined to accept, but wants clear parameters about her role." "Smart woman," Mr. Wilson approved. "Always know what you're agreeing to before you sign." The doorbell rang and Jamal jumped up to answer it. Diana stood on the porch, still in her nursing scrubs, holding a folder. "Mom!" Jamal exclaimed in surprise. "I thought you were working until 6. "Traded shifts with Carmen," she explained, stepping inside. Her expression was resolute, with the quiet determination Jamal recognized from whenever she'd made an important decision. "I wanted to bring these by in person, rather than wait until tomorrow's meeting." Thomas rose to greet her. "Diana, we weren't expecting you." "I know," she said simply, "but after reviewing all the materials you sent, and doing some research of my own, I realized there's no reason to delay." She opened the folder and extracted several pages of notes. "I've outlined my conditions for accepting the director position at the foundation. The main one being that this needs to be more than a vanity project or a band-aid for corporate guilt." Mr. Wilson leaned forward in his chair, eyes bright with interest. "I couldn't agree more. What are you proposing?" Diana sat across from him, her professional demeanor firmly in place. "First, the foundation needs secure, long-term funding, not subject to corporate whims or market fluctuations. Second, programming must prioritize underserved communities, with scholarships covering not just tuition, but living expenses for those who need them. Third, Parker Automotive needs to commit to hiring graduates of the program, giving them genuine career opportunities, not just training." Thomas accepted the papers Diana handed him, scanning them quickly. These are reasonable stipulations, he acknowledged, and align with what we've been envisioning. The funding structure I proposed would establish an independent endowment, insulated from corporate financial decisions. We would need a board of directors, Diana continued, including community representatives, not just Parker executives. Of course, Thomas agreed, looking impressed by her thoroughness. Would you be willing to help identify potential board members? Diana nodded, then turned to Mr. Wilson. There's one more thing. If I'm going to direct a foundation bearing my husband's name, I need to know exactly what happened between Parker Automotive and Miguel. Not just the corporate decision, but the personal one. The room fell silent. Mr. Wilson's face grew solemn as he glanced between Thomas and Diana. You deserve that, he finally said. The complete truth. He gestured to a nearby bookshelf. Jamal, would you bring me the blue photo album on the second shelf? Jamal retrieved the album and handed it to Mr. Wilson, who opened it carefully, turning pages until he found what he was looking for. Here, he said, pointing to a photograph of a group of men standing around an engine display. Annual Innovation Showcase 2015. Miguel is there, second from right. Diana moved closer, her breath catching as she recognized her husband, younger and proudly standing among his colleagues. He was smiling broadly, one hand resting on a complex engine component. That was his fuel efficiency design, Mr. Wilson explained. Increased mileage by nearly 12% without sacrificing power. Brilliant work. He turned the page to reveal more photos. Miguel wasn't just a mechanic, he was an innovator. The specialty division was creating our most advanced systems, our safest components. Then why dismantle it? Diana asked quietly. Thomas stepped forward. Market pressures, increased competition from overseas manufacturers, quarterly profit demands from shareholders. He shook his head. All the usual corporate justifications that seem so important in boardrooms and so hollow in hindsight. I signed off on the restructuring, Mr. Wilson admitted. Thomas drafted the plan, but I approved it. I told myself it was necessary for the company's survival, but the truth is... He paused, his voice thickening with emotion. The truth is, I was tired. Tired of fighting with my son about the company's direction. Tired of being seen as an outdated obstacle to progress. So you sacrificed people like Miguel, Diana said, her voice remarkably steady. Yes, Mr. Wilson acknowledged simply. When Thomas warned that rehiring Miguel would undermine the restructuring message, I listened, not because I believed it was right, but because I was weary of conflict. Thomas's face reflected genuine remorse. I never connected individual decisions to individual lives. Employees were numbers on a spreadsheet, positions that could be eliminated for efficiency. It took meeting Jamal, hearing about Miguel's death, to make me understand the human cost of corporate strategy. Diana closed the photo album gently. Thank you for your honesty. It doesn't change what happened, but it helps me understand. She squared her shoulders. I'll accept the position as founding director of the Miguel Silva Foundation, effective immediately. We have work to do. The genuine smile that spread across Mr. Wilson's face seemed to erase years from his appearance. This is the first truly good news I've had in a long time, he said. Over the next week, plans accelerated rapidly. Thomas canceled the sale negotiations officially, announcing to the board that Parker Automotive would be pursuing a strategic reorganization focused on innovation and community investment. The news was met with mixed reactions from shareholders, but Thomas held firm, backed by his father's unwavering support. The old workshop on Oak Street, Parker Automotive's original home, buzzed with preliminary renovation activity. Jamal visited the site almost daily after school, watching as decades of dust and neglect were cleared away, revealing the bones of what would become the Miguel Silva Technical Education Center. On a particularly sunny afternoon, Thomas led Jamal through the partially renovated space, pointing out where classrooms would be installed, where engine testing stations would stand, where computer labs would enable digital design work. "What do you think?" Thomas asked, watching Jamal's face as he absorbed the transformation underway. "It's amazing," Jamal admitted, running his hand along a workbench that had been salvaged and refinished. "My dad would have loved this place." "We found something yesterday during the renovation," Thomas said, guiding Jamal toward a small office area. "I wanted to show you before we move it." Inside the office, leaning against a wall, was a large framed photograph that had been carefully cleaned. It showed the original Parker Automotive team standing proudly in front of the very building they were now in. Among them was a young Edward Parker, smiling broadly, his arm around his brother's shoulders. "That's my grandfather, too," Thomas explained, pointing to the other man. "They started this place together. Before profit margins and market share, before corporate strategy, just two brothers who loved cars and believed they could build them better than anyone else." Jamal studied the photograph, noting the pride and purpose in the faces of all the men pictured. "It's like coming full circle," he observed. "In the best possible way," Thomas agreed. "My father suggested we hang this in the main entrance of the new center. A reminder of beginnings. Theirs, and now ours." Meanwhile, Jamal's bicycle repair project had taken on a life of its own. Thomas had delivered on his promise of supplies, and then some. The common area of Jamal's apartment building now featured a fully equipped repair station, complete with professional-grade tools, parts, and even a small inventory system that Jamal was learning to manage. Word spread quickly among neighborhood children. What began as one or two bikes needing minor repairs grew into a steady stream of young visitors, often accompanied by curious parents. Jamal found himself not just fixing bikes, but teaching basic maintenance to their owners. Diana observed this development with a mixture of pride and amazement. On Saturday morning, as she watched Jamal patiently demonstrating proper chain lubrication to an 8-year-old girl with braids and a serious expression, she felt a presence beside her. "He's a natural teacher," Mr. Wilson said, having arrived for his first visit to the makeshift workshop. He walked with a cane now, but his step was steadier than it had been in the hospital. "Just like his father," Diana agreed softly. Mr. Wilson smiled, watching Jamal work. "The foundation will be accepting its first official class of students next month," he said. "But it seems to me the teaching has already begun." Diana nodded, unexpectedly moved by the sight of her son, confidently guiding the young girl's hands as she applied oil to her bicycle chain. "Miguel always said that teaching someone to fix something was more valuable than fixing it for them." "A wise philosophy," Mr. Wilson observed, "one we could apply more broadly." As the morning progressed, more children arrived with bicycles in various states of disrepair. Thomas appeared shortly afterward, having delivered additional supplies, and soon found himself drafted into service holding parts steady, while Jamal worked on a particularly challenging derailleur problem. A small crowd gathered to watch, parents and children alike fascinated by the unlikely scene. An elderly man offering technical advice, a corporate CEO holding bicycle parts, a nurse organizing the waiting queue, and a 12-year-old boy at the center of it all, working with the confidence of someone much older. While he saw the child and her son eagerly flipping through the pages, Diana observed something else too: the shadow of the man he would become, a bridge between what his father had been and what he himself might yet be. The foundation might bear Miguel's name, but it would be Jamal's future it would help shape. The autumn sun cast a golden glow over the renovated building on Oak Street as a modest crowd gathered for the official opening ceremony of the Miguel Silva Foundation for Technical Education. What had once been Parker Automotive's first workshop now stood transformed, the brick exterior cleaned and restored, large windows gleaming, a new sign above the entrance bearing Miguel Silva's name in dignified lettering. Jamal stood near the front of the crowd, shifting nervously from foot to foot, in the new clothes his mother had insisted on for the occasion, slacks and a buttoned shirt that felt strangely formal after a lifetime of jeans and t-shirts. Diana stood beside him, elegant in a simple blue dress, her hand occasionally squeezing his shoulder in silent support. Thomas Parker approached the small podium set up before the entrance. Gone was the corporate armor of expensive suits and calculated expressions. Instead, he wore a casual blazer over an open-collared shirt, his demeanor relaxed yet purposeful. Beside him, Mr. Wilson, who had insisted that everyone return to calling him Edward, sat in a wheelchair, not from necessity, but as a concession to his doctor's warning about standing too long during the ceremony. Even seated, his posture conveyed dignity and pride. "Thank you all for coming today," Thomas began, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd of community members, educators, a few Parker Automotive employees, and several families whose children had already benefited from Jamal's bicycle repair program. This day marks not just the opening of a building, but the beginning of a promise to our community, to the next generation of skilled technicians and innovators, and to the memory of a man whose talent and dedication exemplified everything this foundation seeks to nurture. Jamal felt his heart swell as Thomas spoke about his father, not in vague, generic terms, but with specific references to Miguel's innovations and contributions to Parker Automotive. Thomas had done his research, poring over company archives to understand exactly who Miguel Silva had been professionally. But this foundation wouldn't exist without another Silva, Thomas continued, his gaze finding Jamal in the crowd. A young man whose skill with a bicycle chain set in motion a series of events none of us could have anticipated. Jamal Silva reminded us of what Parker Automotive was founded upon. Not profit margins or market share, but the simple satisfaction of fixing what is broken, of making things work better than before. Jamal felt his cheeks warm at the unexpected recognition. Diana's arm wrapped around his shoulders, pulling him close against her side. After Thomas concluded his remarks, Diana stepped forward to cut the ceremonial ribbon. As the founding director of the Miguel Silva Foundation, this moment officially launched her new career, a path she had never imagined, but now embraced with characteristic determination and heart. Miguel believed that understanding how things work gives us power, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion evident in her eyes. Not power over others, but the power to solve problems, to create, to improve the world around us. This foundation will give that power to young people who might otherwise never discover their own potential. With a clean snip of the oversized scissors, Diana cut the blue ribbon stretched across the entrance. Applause erupted from the gathered crowd, none more enthusiastic than the group of neighborhood children who had become regulars at Jamal's bicycle repair station. As people began to move inside for tours of the facility, Edward motioned for Jamal to come closer to his wheelchair. "I have something for you," the elderly man said, reaching beside his chair where a worn leather case rested. "Something that belongs in your hands now." Jamal knelt beside the wheelchair as Edward lifted the case onto his lap and opened it. Inside lay a set of tools unlike any Jamal had seen before, each one precisely organized, their handles worn smooth from decades of use, their metal surfaces bearing the patina of age but meticulously maintained. "These were my first professional tools," Edward explained, his weathered hands hovering reverently over the collection. "My father gave them to me when I was 16. Later, I taught Thomas with these same tools, and years after that, I taught my grandson Ryan." His voice caught slightly on the name. "They've shaped 3 generations of Parker men, and now—" He closed the case and held it out to Jamal. "Now, they should help shape whatever you will become." Jamal accepted the case with trembling hands, understanding the weight of what he was being given. Not just tools, but legacy, trust, connection. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. "You don't need to say anything," Edward assured him. "Just use them well. Teach others what they teach you." Diana and Thomas, who had been watching this exchange from a short distance, approached now. Thomas placed a hand on his father's shoulder, a gesture of affection that had become increasingly natural between them in recent weeks. "There's something else inside the case," Thomas said quietly. "Dad found it while going through some old files." Jamal opened the case again, searching until he found an envelope tucked into a small compartment in the lid. His name wasn't on it. Instead, it was addressed simply to Miguel Silva. "I wrote that letter the week after the restructuring," Edward explained, his expression solemn. "I intended to send it along with an offer to join my private workshop. But when Thomas convinced me that would undermine the corporate decision," he shook his head. "I kept it, unable to send it but unwilling to destroy it. A reminder of my failure to follow my own conscience." With careful fingers, Jamal opened the envelope. The letter inside was brief but heartfelt, an apology for the layoff, praise for Miguel's exceptional work, and an offer of a position that would have kept him at Parker Automotive, working directly with Edward on special projects. Jamal read it silently, then passed it to his mother. Diana's eyes filled with tears as she scanned the yellowed page. "He never knew you valued him this much," she said to Edward. "That's my deepest regret," the old man acknowledged. "One of many I'm trying to address before my time runs out." Inside the foundation building, the main entrance hall had been transformed into a small museum space, celebrating both Parker Automotive's history and the technical innovations Miguel had contributed during his time with the company. Prominently displayed was the restored bicycle, the same one Jamal had fixed on that rainy afternoon that now seemed both recent and distant at once. "The bicycle belongs here," Edward had insisted during planning. "It's the physical embodiment of how small repairs can lead to much larger healing." Now, as visitors circulated through the space, many paused to read the plaque beside the bicycle, which briefly told the story of a boy who stopped to help an old man in the rain, unknowingly beginning a journey that would connect two families and transform a community. Thomas joined Jamal beside the bicycle display, both of them watching as a group of children pressed close to examine the now famous blue bicycle. "The first official class starts Monday," Thomas said. 20 students, ages 14 to 18, all from neighborhoods where technical education opportunities have been limited. Your mother has done an incredible job organizing the curriculum." Jamal nodded, his chest tight with pride, for his mother's accomplishments, for his father's legacy, and for his own small role in making all this possible. "Will you continue your bicycle repair program?" Thomas asked, "even with the foundation opening?" "Definitely," Jamal replied without hesitation. "The foundation is amazing, but some kids just need their bikes fixed so they can get to school or to jobs. It's not as fancy as all this, but it matters." Thomas smiled, recognizing wisdom beyond the boy's years. "Not as fancy, perhaps, but every bit as important. That's a lesson my father tried to teach me that I'm only now beginning to understand. True value isn't always where we think it is." A month after the opening ceremony, the Miguel Silva Foundation had settled into a rhythm of daily classes and workshops. Edward, despite his doctor's recommendation to rest, had taken on a role teaching specialized mechanical courses 2 afternoons a week. His health had improved markedly with this renewed sense of purpose, and while he still used a cane, he rarely required the wheelchair anymore. Diana had discovered an unexpected talent for administration, bringing the same organized compassion to the foundation that had characterized her nursing career. She worked closely with Thomas, who had restructured his role at Parker Automotive to allow him time to serve as the foundation's board chairman. And Jamal? He split his time between attending school, helping with introductory classes at the foundation, and maintaining his neighborhood bicycle repair service, which had grown to include 2 additional volunteers, teenagers who had shown interest and aptitude for the work. On a crisp Saturday morning, Jamal sat on the steps outside his apartment building, surrounded by tools from Edward's vintage collection. He was working on a particularly challenging repair, a bicycle with multiple issues that had been abandoned and recovered from a dumpster. Its new owner, a thin boy named Marcus who had recently moved to the neighborhood, watched intently as Jamal carefully extracted a damaged bearing from the wheel hub. "Will it actually work again?" Marcus asked doubtfully, eyeing the rusty frame and mangled components. "Definitely," Jamal assured him, demonstrating how the new bearings would fit. "The frame is solid. That's what matters most. Everything else is fixable." "How do you know all this stuff?" Marcus asked, scooting closer to see better. Jamal smiled, handing the boy a small wrench from Edward's tool case. "My dad taught me some of it. Then I learned more from books and videos. But mostly by doing. By not being afraid to try fixing things." "Could you teach me?" Marcus asked hesitantly. "That's why I'm showing you how to do this instead of just doing it for you," Jamal explained, guiding the boy's hands as he tightened a bolt. "Next time, you'll know how to do it yourself." As they worked together, more children gathered, some with bicycles needing minor adjustments, others simply curious about what was happening. Jamal answered questions patiently, demonstrating techniques, explaining the function of each component they repaired. From the apartment window above, Diana watched her son surrounded by neighborhood children, all focused intently on the lesson he was giving. Thomas and Edward had stopped by to deliver some new parts for the repair program, and now stood beside her at the window. "He's found his calling," Edward observed quietly. Diana nodded, her eyes never leaving her son. "Miguel used to say that Jamal had a gift, not just for fixing things, but for understanding them in a way that made the world make sense." When a younger child asked Jamal why he fixed bicycles for free, instead of charging like the shops downtown, Jamal looked up at the apartment window where he knew his mother was watching. He smiled, touching the small, wrench-shaped pendant he wore on a chain around his neck, made from one of his father's old tools. "Because some broken chains fix others we didn't even know were broken," he answered, a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life, just like the toolbox from the Parkers in the memory of his father.